Hey guys, it is Orion Webster here, and welcome back to another episode of the Intellectuals Paradise podcast. So, a few days ago I just went ahead and, it's been a while, listened to episode 1 to kind of refresh myself on what I was talking about, and so I figured we would kind of re-jump back into that today. If you recall, at the end of the last podcast, I talked a little bit about capitalism, and I was delving into, I think, a little bit of survival of the fittest and sort of meritocracy. And today I wanted to talk about that in a little bit more depth and share more of my thoughts on it, and then also talk about the differences between that and some other kind of social economic systems, and or just, different ways of, effectively wealth distribution in societies. So let's just kind of jump right in. So a little housekeeping first, actually. I want to apologize for the big break between the last episodes. There wasn't really a reason for that. To put it simply, I kind of got lazy. There were kind of other things happening. I was kind of in a slump, but hopefully I will start kind of doing these more frequently. So expect to see these a little bit more frequently than every 2 months. I mean, I don't know how frequently I will do these, but so I'm not going to make any promises at this moment. Since this is only episode 2, this can certainly pivot and change into something else. But I just want you guys to know that beforehand. So anyway, getting started here. So last time I talked a little bit about capitalism. So let us talk about capitalism once again. So as most people are probably already aware, to the extent that I probably don't need to offer a Google definition or anything of the sort, capitalism is effectively a system of, at least the way we do it in America, it's a meritocracy. It involves a free market where, various private companies, via basically in incentives and competition, provide products to societies. That is sort of the gist of it. And then people obtain money based on their individual inputs or outputs, you could say, and say the company they work for, or just what they produce, or if they're an entrepreneur, and yada yada yada. So that's pretty basic. So at a basic level, I talked about some of the important similarities between that and survival of the fittest, which, again, survival of the fittest was... It's basically a way of talking about the meritocracy as it's relevant to evolutionary psychology. So, in the sense that when I look at, how, I guess, whether it's other primates or whether, I think, humans in the past have thrived, and really just the way that the world as we kind of know it in terms of the hierarchy of life is structured, it is, as we often talk about, survival of the most adaptable. And so it's kind of the sense that the amount of value in an ideal system that one receives is proportionate to, I guess you could say, the amount of value that one receives is proportionate to the amount of value that they give, for the most part, and the amount of value that they settle for, in a sense. So that's really important. So, you could say that, in America we have a sense of freedom that's based on the fact that one can work a little smarter, read a little bit more, get a better education, pay more attention in school, reach out to other folks, work a little bit harder and different things like that, and then kind of get ahead and make a little bit more money, or be able to have more stuff, or different stuff, and basically have access to more options and opportunities than some other people might be, might want to for various reasons, or might be able to for various other reasons. So that at a basic level is kind of a gist of how the system here in America, which is the one that I'm most familiar with, being that I was born and raised here. So talking about, I guess, the next logical step is kind of the other extreme, which is effectively communism. And from my understanding of communism, although fortunately I have not lived in a communistic society, it is sort of this idea that regardless of one's input and labor at a basic level, there is kind of this idea of a universal basic income. So that way everybody can kind of survive and get along and sort of be happy and do what they're going to do, and then not have genetics and differences in birth, or you could say accidents of birth, determine sort of their lot in life. And then there are, you could say, various pros and cons with that system. I should note, as we get into this here, my goal here today is not necessarily to arrive at a conclusion that says, well, this is the best system, although I will probably talk about that. But more so just to talk about, also, I think the reality that there are pros and cons to all these different systems, and that it's not really a matter of right or wrong. I think it's a matter of time and place. So anyway, so I think that, so at a basic level, I think that the universal basic income idea is interesting. It seems noble at a basic level, because you could say that it deals with problems that that free market on its face doesn't deal with, right? It doesn't create a social net, or it does. It creates a social net. Communism creates a social net. Sorry, getting everything all confused here. Communism creates a social net for people who are maybe sick, or who have various problems, or people who just are, for whatever reason, not going to be able to perform on the level of a normal person. And so there are various benefits to that you could talk about. I think that one of the points that's important here is that usually when we talk about these various systems, we're not really talking about them. We're not talking about having societies that are 100% one of these systems. So, like when you have America, for instance, and you talk about capitalism, right? We are not a libertarian society, for instance. So we're not necessarily expecting everything to be taken care of by free markets, right? We're not having private companies run the police, or fix, interstate roads and things like that, or, build post offices and fund schools, and various other organizations. And I think, one of the reasons for that is because we realize, and economists realize, that in those situations where things are privately run, you have really a conflict of interest. So you have an incentive that is at conflict with your job. If you say, okay, well, obviously the interest, or you could say what the ideal, is to have objective police who are going to help people and, enable us to live in a society where we can all kind of feel, have a decent sense of safety and a decent sense of, liberty, without being harmed by other people for, basically no reason. So that's kind of, I think, the ideal for police in America, or as I think most of us see it. And if you had this private problem, effectively, or if you had a private police institution, in effect, you would have a gang of thugs that work in the interests of the person paying them. Because what else would you expect to have in that situation? I'm not saying that good people or that there aren't good and bad people. But I mean, the reality is that the one thing that will that will make good people make bad decisions, or what we might otherwise call bad people, is perverse incentives. And again, I mean, this is something that economists talk about. This is something that some other very smart people have talked about, like Charlie Munger. And of course, we can get into all that as well. But so I think that is an important thing to think about, is that when you have things like free market and capitalism, we're not necessarily suggesting a system where you have, 100% capitalism, where everything is run by the free market and there are no government-run institutions, right? So there is, you could say we're on kind of a socialistic spectrum, right? So we're still social in the sense that we're still trying to help each other. We're trying to have freedom and liberty, but we're also trying to help people who are actually disadvantaged, often by accidents of their birth, or by accidents that occur later in life that people just really couldn't have controlled for, and things like that. So I mean, obviously there's a number of reasons why you would want to have systems to help people who are, in a bad place, or who effectively need some extra support. And I think that, and one good reason for this, if you're not so concerned with giving your money to strangers, is that we can probably imagine, if we don't already have a family member who is a person like this, who's in need of extra care, like a grandparent, let's say, or, someone in your family who's an elder who maybe has various problems and gets, support and things of that nature. I think most of us could easily imagine a period where this would be the case. I mean, I think we can all think of, good reasons why you'd want to have a system like that. And then, of course, you could talk about socialism on a broader level, which is sort of really, it's not even a space in between capitalism and communism, but I think socialism is, it's kind of it's a gray area that tries to, I think, balance liberties and freedom and merit with taking care of people who need it. So I think that's kind of what socialism is about. And of course, again, you can have socialism on a spectrum, and you can have, different elements of socialistic ideology or different ideas without necessarily taking all of it. So I think that's another important takeaway from this discussion, hopefully, that you'll be able to go away with, is that I think it's important that we really take the pros and cons of the various systems, and we try to take the stuff that's going to be useful, and maybe consider some of the other stuff, and then try to use it in a way where we are getting as much upside as possible while getting as little downside as possible. I mean, of course, I think that's what makes sense. And so I think considering that, it is important, I guess, when determining what the best path forward is, or the way in which you can create the best possible outcome, is to consider the pros and cons, and to try to sort of take the best pieces, discard what's not necessary, and add your own spin on it, in a sense, sort of in the words of Bruce Lee there. So anyway, kind of getting deeper into this. So I did want to talk a little bit more about, my view on how these different systems coexist in the world that we live in today, because I think this is important. This is an important topic. I mean, I would say that, and maybe, and actually, I don't think this is a bold statement, but I would actually venture to say that the reason in which, or the reason that, very socialistic societies can exist, or why communistic societies can work in some sense, I actually think is largely because they have very capitalistic or very merit merit-driven societies that sort of counterbalance them. So let me explain what I mean. So, and without even actually using specific examples, which we can also talk about, but even in the theoretical. So if you have a place that is very communistic, right? I think we have an understanding that communism does not incentivize a great amount of innovation, as where meritocracy and capitalism, where everything is in a sense on oh man, what's the word I'm looking for? On commission. Sorry about that, little brain fart. Where everything is kind of on commission, I think people are more likely to work harder and work smarter because they understand that their merit is what, at the end of the day, determines the amount of value or the amount of money and different things they're going to get. So, and I think that, innovation and effectively technology and things like that are what end up raising the standard of living for everybody, regardless of class, in a way that really doesn't have many downsides. And of course, it's easy to argue against this when you look at some of the negative impacts of, things like laptops and cell phones and different pieces of technology like that. But I also think that most of us can agree that these things have also greatly enhanced the workplace, and they've greatly enhanced people's access to different resources and education that we just never had before in history. And it's greatly leveled the playing field to where somebody with a great amount of curiosity who's starting at the bottom can compete with the big fish, in a sense. And that's one of the really unique things about this technology. And of course, without the innovation and without places that, are based on merit and that incentivize, people to innovate, you wouldn't be having these technologies as we are. So I think that, the communistic societies where people are getting the universal basic income and they're kind of doing their own thing, and I think that those societies are good for, probably manufacturing and things like that, or lower-end jobs where everybody is kind of not necessarily an equally skilled worker, but where if you're simply looking for a massive resource of different groups of people, with skills, then those are great places to look for them, right? I would say that it's probably still one of the reasons why, the U.S. innovates and then it ends up, outsourcing a lot of the different, labor type stuff to China and things like that, or just some offshore places like India, because it's cheaper. You have workers who you don't have to pay a lot to do these different jobs because they're not living, number one, in societies with tons of merit and freedom, so they're not as incentivized to those jobs in the first place, unless of course, there's a whole lot more to it than that. But like I said, I think that these coexist together. Now, in terms of, sort of the good, bad, and the ugly, or the good, better, and best, I don't know that, because like I said, I think that the concept of a universal basic income is probably wouldn't have been the best idea in history. I think that it's becoming a better idea recently, or is going to become a better idea when we look at things like superintelligence and machines and different things like that. And there's a lot of people who have talked about this at length, so I'm not going to do it here. If you want to hear about that, you could go listen to Kevin Kelly or Elon Musk or something like that talk on these subjects. But I would simply say that when you have a communistic system, I think what you're enabling is an enhancement of the human experience on the other side of the spectrum. So instead of enhancing the financial aspect and enhancing the technological, you're enhancing, people's ability, I think, to enjoy each other's company and to be grateful and to appreciate things. And I think you're incentivizing people to appreciate, the things outside money and work, and to appreciate the other things in life besides that more. And so that's part of what I mean when I talk about pros and cons, is that I think that there really are advantages to a communistic or to a socialistic system in certain ways. They might just not be to the ways that some people value or have come to value, in a sense, which is why some people will protest against communism or protest against, capitalism and all these different things. Because I think it's because we're used to being in those systems and we've grown accustomed to living that way. And I guess when you imagine the value of what you already have, it's hard to imagine yourself being on the opposite system and that still somehow being good, just in a different way. But I guess the thing is that it's not as if... I think a good way of looking at it is kind of like a sort of like a landscape of different possibilities, and along this landscape you can have different peaks and different valleys, but you might have two systems that are actually both peaks on an equivalent height that are very different. And I think in some sense, at least, you can have a, maybe a more socialistic or communistic system. And again, maybe communism isn't really the right word. I think socialism is a more moderate and more modern and probably effective version of this, but so I'll say a more socialistic system, and have that be an effective equivalent to a more capitalism merit-based system, just in some different ways. So, I mean, again, I think the really cool thing about these topics is that they are extremely, or can get extremely complex, and I think it's very easy to, perhaps go on for hours talking about all the different variations and all the different possibilities. But I kind of think at the end of the day, it's not necessarily that like capitalism is better, that socialism is better, that communism is better, or anything like that. But that these systems have pros and cons, and they may even work, or not may even, but may even work in certain circumstances when you're trying to optimize for certain things. So, I guess in the interest of not making this episode too long, let me know what you guys think about some of the stuff that I said here. I know that this wasn't a very long episode, but I thought I would experiment with just a little bit of a shorter length than I did in the first episode, because that was mostly just introductory housekeeping stuff. And, I've decided that I probably want to hover somewhere around maybe 20 to 25 minutes. I know the first episode was only 31 or somewhere around there, but because I don't want to lose people's focus and attention. I want people to kind of easily listen to these and, have time to really kind of complete it on a trip to work or while performing a workout without feeling like you've stopped in the middle of it, like I talked about in the first episode. So anyway, if you liked it, obviously, leave me a comment, tell me what you liked about it. If you didn't, and you would can be bothered to, I don't know if that's the right word, but if you would please, spend a moment telling me why you didn't like it, or what I can do to improve, or simply, what about it you thought that I could improve. I would greatly appreciate constructive feedback of that sort as well. So anyway, thank you guys for listening, and this is Orion Webster signing out. Have a good day.